There we go. All right, welcome everyone. This is the second year we are doing a forest fires presentation. This is Forest Fires Part 2, Certifiably Dangerous. This is going to be a exploration of Active Directory certificate services abuse and escalation paths. Start with an agenda. Yes, I'm a consultant. I do have an agenda slide. So we'll start with some introductions, a little TLDR, a quick primer on what ADCS is and how it works. We're gonna do an overview of the attack surface and techniques, and then we're gonna do a deep dive into escalation path 1 and escalation path 4. These are the two primary ones that I see on 90+% of my ops. Um, and then we're gonna close out with a little detection engineering kind of talk, and I'll talk about how to harden and mitigate against this. So we'll go ahead and start with who am I? I'm Chris. I run the offensive team at Fulcrum, also known as Discordant Melody. It's my hacker handle. And it's also my X handle. I absolutely I eat and breathe Active Directory exploitation. It's just one of my main research areas. Although I will say my current obsession is kind of exploiting and securing LLMs. Fun fact about me, I live on a livestock ranch in the middle of nowhere, Illinois. I raise chickens and I'm soon to have cows. And yeah, I kind of like machines and animals more than people. Oh, hang on. Looks like my share died. Let's try this again. Um, Can I get a quick confirmation from the chat? Can you guys see my presentation? Okay, perfect. Thank you guys. Sorry about that. Um, so yeah, moving on into like what we're doing here. So why should you care about ADCS abuse? First off, it's increasingly becoming a more and more widespread issue. I would honestly be willing to bet if I fished every org that's on this call right now, I would be DA in over half of them in 5 minutes flat. And I would use ADCS to do it. ADCS is kind of what Kerber roasting has been for like the last decade and a half. It's just widespread. It's an instant kill, and I would say ADCS is probably an easier and more reliable one-shot kill on an operation. At its simplest, the abuse is using overly permissive certificate templates to create valid logon certificates for any user in the domain. One of the kind of really bad parts about this is if you deploy certain applications in your environment, like let's say a very popular virtualization suite, they deploy vulnerable certificate templates for you automatically if you have ADCS enabled in your environment. Um, so I find this misconfiguration or these types of misconfigurations everywhere, and I think that it's really under monitored at this point. Which leads me to something I overheard at DerbyCon. Everything is sneaky until someone is looking for it. And right now, I don't think most orgs are really looking for it, or if they do, their searches are not in a way that they can respond quickly enough. Because when we go through this, there is no long attack chain. It's just one done. I'm now EA, and I start turning off your monitoring software. So quick primer on what ADCS is. Um, Active Directory Certificate Services is basically Microsoft's PKI. PKI, I'll go through some key terms here in a minute, but PKI is basically what we call any infrastructure for public-private key encryption schemes. ADCS uses X509 certificates primarily, like most other PKI. If that sounds familiar to you and you can't place it, it's probably because you've worked with an SSL cert at some point or another. That's another X509 certificate standard. And I'll use that as a metaphor a few times during while we talk here. So in ADCS, they have a concept called EKUs, and these EKUs, the extended key usages, are kind of how ADCS controls what a specific certificate is used for. That's managed on the CA side. That's not in the certificate. Um, and then there's a few other ones. The enrollment paths. This is how essentially what ADCS is trying to do is it tries to give you an easy button and say you can put together a template and say, hey, if you meet these requirements, you're a member of this group, and you can request this type of certificate with no intervention. So that's what like when we talk about enrollment paths, like auto enroll via GPO, web enroll, enrollment agents are some special types of ADCS certificates. We'll briefly touch on those, but they're a little out of scope for the main focus of this talk. So I do want to go over some key terms that I'm going to use a lot. We already talked about PKI. It's basically what you use for the infrastructure that's used to run public-private key encryption. Um, there's also, you'll hear me say CSR a lot. CSR is the request that's generated by the user's machine that's sent to the PKI in order to get a certificate issued. You also hear me say CA or certificate authority a lot. This is kind of the backbone of the PKI. This is the server that actually responds to CSRs and actually issues certificates. And then SAN, this is the big one. I'm going to say this over and over and over because this is where all of this abuse is enabled by. A SAN is a subject alternative name. And essentially, what it is you have a subject, which is generally the user requesting the certificate. And a SAN says that basically that this certificate is also valid for these names. That becomes very important as we go on. If you've ever worked with SSL certs, this is like the equivalent of getting a SSL cert for www.fulcrum.com and then having it also be valid for email.fulcrum or vpn.fulcrum. Um, except in with ADCS, when we're talking about authentication ones, it means that this certificate says I am who I say I am, but I'm also this other user, say a domain or enterprise admin. And the last term, I've already briefly hit on this one too, EKU, extended use key usage. This is what a certificate can be used for. The ones I listed a few of the most common. Authentication is one of them. Code signing, SSL, all of these are determined like how those certificates are used are determined by their EKUs. The one we'll be focusing on here is going to be authentication. So let's talk about the attack surface. There are 16 published exploit or escalation paths for ADCS. There's 8 from the original white paper, which I'll have linked in this presentation, which we'll make sure people have access to after the conference. Um, these original 8 are the ones that are the most common ones we see. There's 8 additional ones that have been published since the original white paper, and we are going to discuss ESC1 and ESC4 in depth. Um, I will briefly touch on all 8 of the original ones, but I'm going to blow through them, and it's mostly for your reference later when you look at the slides. I do recommend if this is something you want to get deeper into any of these escalation paths, especially the ones I'm not going super deep in. Um, Please go look at the white paper certified pre-owned by Spectre Ops. It's 143 pages of ADCS exploitation. It's a really in-depth technical read, and it will really explain things a lot better than I'm going to explain them. I'm going to talk more about how we do it, not why it works. So, quick overview of all of the original 8. ESC1 is essentially overly permissive enrollment rights. We'll talk about this more. ESC2 is basically it's the same thing as ESC1, but for ESC1, it's a large group like domain users or authenticated users. ESC2 is doing the same thing but using a single low privilege user. So if a single user has rights to make these to enroll, then it would be ESC2, even though the tactical use is the exact same. ESC3 involves these enrollment agents. An enrollment agent is a special kind of certificate that if you have that certificate, you can present it and say, and it says that I have rights to request certificates on behalf of other people. Um, the really the only big thing to know about ESC3 is if you use these enrollment agent certificates, make sure they're secured. Because if they get into the wrong hands, you can get certificates for any. ESC4, this is essentially, and we will talk more about this, but TLDR is um, if you have weak ACLs on your Active Directory objects, because everything in Active Directory is an object, so those certificate templates are objects. If you have weak ACLs on those, an adversary can go in and take a non-vulnerable certificate template and make it vulnerable. Um, five, five and or five, six, 5 and 6 are both misconfigurations at the CIA level. I've never seen these in the wild, but it's possible for it to be configured this way. But essentially, 5 is if the CA is configured to honor SANs, even if the template doesn't allow for SANs, then I can essentially add a SAN to my certificate and the CA will honor it. 6 is if the CA itself is compromised or its private key is compromised, adversaries can use that private key to forge their own certificates without requesting. ESC7 is basically NTLM relay. If the same way we would do it like intercepting man in the middle a NTLM authentication and then replaying it to another equation. This is basically the same thing but with certificates. The only reason you really need to know about ESC7 is if you use smart cards in your environment. If you use smart cards in your environment, go read the white paper that's at the end of this and read up on ESC7 because this is very, very difficult to detect when it's done. And then ESC8 is another kind of edge case. One of the ways you can harden certificate templates is to require a human to approve them. And you do this by granting the user certificate manager rights. If that certificate manager is compromised, they can just approve their own certs. It's kind of a no doubt thing, but it is technically its own unique path. The point and reason I'm not going and went a little bit on all of these is this area is still super actively being researched by security researchers and adversaries. I said there's 16 escalation. I said published escalation paths. And I use that word very deliberately. There is tradecraft that has not yet been published. I can think of 2 different escalation paths that are not like there's no published white paper on them. And I guarantee you like large scale adversaries are holding on to their own tradecraft as well. And to be honest, you're likely to see a whole lot more of this tradecraft to come out over the next several years as researchers just pour through all of this attack surface. So before somebody asks, um, yes, Microsoft issued a patch for this. No, the patch doesn't work. Um, it broke ADCS tradecraft from a tooling perspective, sort of. But all the tooling has now been updated to allow these strong mappings. All that strong mapping, which is what that patch does, is say that instead of requiring a username, you have to give a user security ID or an object SID. Um, if I'm in a place to be able to use Certify and to use ADCS, I'm already on your network and I already have a basic set of credentials. So all of this information is still available to me from AD because AD is global read for all authenticated users. I already kind of covered this, so I'm just going to keep going. All right, so I want to get to the real world. This is kind of the meat and potatoes. So over the next several slides, I'm gonna go into a deep dive on ESC1 and ESC4. These 2 techniques make up 90%, 95 probably, but really I might be a little overzealous there, but it's definitely at least 90% um, Richard, I'll get to that question at the end, just so you know. I did see it though. Um, so this makes up most of my ADCS compromises, and honestly, ADCS makes up about half of my domain compromises over the last few years. Um, ESC1 is the most common, and the main reason for that is that almost all the other ones are about how do you enable ESC1. And ESC4 is 100%. Like you use ESC4 to be able to use ESC1 where it otherwise wouldn't be available. So let's talk about ESC1. We need a few things, and I know these some of these slides are going to be really busy, but I'll promise I'll explain everything. So the first thing we need on a certificate template is we need the certificate name flag to be set to enrollee supplies subject. Whenever you see the this property, I want your brain to edit it and say this means sans. This means subject alternative names. So it's important that we have that. Otherwise, it won't. We can get certificates, but they won't be able to be used for other users. The next thing we really need to do, have is the EKU needs to be good for client authentication. There are attack vectors that other certificates could be useful for, but if you actually want to log in and escalate privileges to an EA or a DA, um, then you need client authentication to be enabled. Um, Thankfully, this is also the most common EKU you will see in most templates is client auth. Um, so the last one of things we need to be there is enrollment rights. So when you create a certificate template, you assign enrollment rights, and you say that this group can use it, this group can use it. What we're looking for is a low privilege global security group. Um, so like domain users, authenticated users, even domain computers, because if I can compromise a computer account by, say, escalating privileges locally, I can use that computer account to request a cert. Um, so when all three of these things are there, there's one last little check that I very rarely see this enabled, but you do need to check to make sure that manager approval required equals false. And if this is false, this will also be zero. But just make sure both of these say false and zero. So how do we find out what these settings are, and are they set in the way we need them? I want to talk a little bit about Certify. This is an open source tool. It was actually developed and it's maintained by one of my previous employers, SpecterOps. It's basically a Swiss Army knife for ADCS. It allows you to manage templates. It allows you to request certificates. It does AD template vulnerability scanning. It's just basically the end-all tool for this. The only thing that it doesn't do that we'll talk about today is actually using the certificate. You're gonna have to use another tool for that. Um, but because it's a scanner, that this actually can be used, but not only offensively, but the same way that we would look for vulnerable certificate templates. I honestly think Blue Team should be running this periodically to see if they have vulnerable certificate templates. If you're not doing that with another tool. As a bonus, this tool is also written in C#, which means we can escalate it in memory, or we can execute it in memory, not escalate. Escalate comes later. Um, all right, so let's start with how we find these certificates. So this screenshot here is showing the using scanner mode. I am going to zoom in a little to make this easier to see while I explain these. So the enum templates tells Certify to run in scan mode. Um, by default, without any switches, this will return every certificate template. In large orgs, this might be hundreds of certificate templates. So we're going to filter this for our needs. So the first thing I'm filtering for, this is filter dash enabled, just means ignore any disabled or unpublished certificates. Obviously, we can't use them. We don't care. Filter vulnerable means it will only show you certificates that have one of the 16 escalation paths that's been published. Certify does support all 16 now as of 2.0. So it will show you all of those. And then this is kind of a last one. This is kind of a pro tip one. If you, oh, excuse me. If you are looking through these, almost every certificate template is going to uh, allow enrollment by domain admins, enterprise admins, all these global admin groups. It just clutters up the output and makes it harder to tell which groups whether you control a group that's in there or not. So I always run hide admins, and that just hides those from the output. Um, Last note I'll have on this one, ooh, wrong button. Sorry about that, guys. The last note that I'll put on here. Technically, there's two other filters we could use if we were looking specifically for ESC1. Um, if there's a filter dash supply dash subject, which will filter only showing ones that have that enrollee supply subject parameter enabled, and then there's filter client auth, which will check for that EKU. That puts everything we need in one and only shows you the certs that meet all of those. I never do this though because I'm a pen tester. I'm actually my job isn't to find one escalation path. I need to find all of them that are available. So I always want to see all 16. But if you're looking for one for exploitation that you know you can do, like ESC1, that you can use those last two. And that's in my my notes at the end of the presentation for how to use the tool. I also posted, this is the link to the GitHub. They have fantastic documentation. If you go to this GitHub, scroll down, there's a link for the wiki. It explains every flag, every function type very well, and it shows you how to do every one of these escalation paths, start to finish. So when we run this, this is an example of the output we would get. This is a vulnerable certificate. You can tell for one reason, it says ESC1 right here. But don't trust this. Sometimes these will be incorrect. So you always want to look and check for those things we talked. Sorry about that. My headset died. Um, Anyhow, so yeah, so you want to look for that enrollee supply subject, make sure manager approval is off, make sure client authentication is there, and then make sure you have a global security group that you already control. Since we have all these things, we know we can exploit this, and we're going to use the same tool to request the certificate. Um, so in this case, I'm going to again zoom in to show a little bit. Actually, I'm going to back up for 1 second. Um, when you see this, you want to notate from this output. You need to notate the publishing CA and the template name because you're going to need that for the exploitation. Now I'll go into this next slide. So the request module does what it says on the 10. We have to have the CA flag. This tells it which CA to request from. The template flag, which tells it the name of the template we want to use. And then in order for this to be successful in modern ADCS, you need both the UPN, which is the name of a user you want to impersonate. And in this case, I'm using the global domain administrator, the default administrator. And you also need the SID for that. If you don't have the SID, don't know the SID for this, it is in your Bloodhound data. Generally, you will do run Bloodhound prior to this, but I promised when I was making this talk that I wasn't going to show a ton of Bloodhound graphs since we spent a lot of time on it last year. But you can get this SID data from Bloodhound. It's called the object ID, or you can use PowerShell or even MMC to get this SID for the user. But the important thing to note is the UPN and SID are for the user you want to impersonate, not the user you're using to request. The user you're using to request will get auto-filled um, by the actual software. So then you can see here when we send it, it says the user that's making the request. In this case, in my lab, it's low priv. It tells you that it just kind of reiterates what you've put in here. And what you're really hoping to see is this down here at the bottom. Certificate has been issued. And I snip this off. This will actually be something like 8 or 9 lines, depending on how big your console is. It's a very, very long base 64 blob. It's basically the base 64 representation of the certificate. You can then save that as a certificate, or I actually just copy this into a notepad because the tooling I like to use to use the certificate actually asks for it in base 64. Um, all right, so now that we've got a blob of the certificate, how do we use it? If you guys were at Forest Fires last year, we talked a lot about Rubius. We use this for Kerberoasting, all kinds. It's basically a Kerberos client, a self-contained Kerberos client. It's also a SpecterOps tool. It's also a tool that runs in C Sharp, so we can use it in memory, all kinds of fun stuff. But it's an offensive Kerberos client. So the way we would import this, so normally if anytime you want to ask for a Kerberos ticket, you could use Rubius to do it. And normally you would do ask TGT, that's the get a Kerberos ticket function. You give the user and then you use slash password. But in this case, we don't have the password for this user, but we do have a certificate that's valid that has this user's name on it. So we can give it that certificate, and then we use slash PTT to pass it into our current session. And what we're hoping to see is an output similar to this. Um, you'll see TGT requested. It'll give you a base 64 representation of the ticket. I've snipped that off again. Um, and you're going to see ticket successfully imported. And that's because we use pass TT or PTT. That's pass the ticket. Um, so now our session actually, in this case, is now a domain admin, and we can validate that by hitting an admin share on a domain controller. Uh, dir whack whack DC whack C $ is a great way to just to quickly, easily check and see if if your pribs are applied. And once you do that, you can start moving laterally. You can use SMB. Basically at this point you own the domain. So you could also, if you weren't like a security tester like I am, this is also the part where I could start using SMB to deploy encrypting tools to every server in the environment. I could start siphoning up all of your data, exfilling it, and then holding it for ransom. Um, Once this has happened, it's game over. It's very much a one-shot kill. And it was 3 commands we ran. Um, a little pro tip though, sometimes I do see in modern environments, if you request this ticket and you don't get a TGT request successful, you get something that says KDC error off not supported. Your 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 certificate is fine. Rubius by default will always submit a certificate request in RC4 HMAT format, and a lot of companies now are blocking the authentic or that encryption type because it's a very weak encryption or hashing algorithm. It's basically the same thing when you think of NTLM v1. That's RC4 HMAT. So to make it harder for people to Kerberos, they will disable that. So if you just do this like the way I put this command here, and you get that KDC off air, just add into your command, add AES 128 or AES 256, just / in either one of those, and try it again, and I'll almost guarantee you'll get your ticket back. Um, it's a non-standard config, but it's one that I see very often these days. That was ESC1 in a nutshell. So I'm going to quickly talk about ESC4 too, or ESC4 as well. So this escalation path becomes relevant if I don't already have an ESC1 available to me when I run that scanner. If I can find one of those certificate templates where I have the right property permission, that ACL is enabled, um, then I can actually make a certificate template vulnerable. And I know that sounds like a very um, academic idea, but I see this all the time because I'm going to go show you on my next slide. There's lots of ways I can get right property on a template. So in order to do this, kind of the workflow is going to look like we find one that we can modify, find a template we can modify, and then we're going to use certify to set enrollee supply subject, client authentication, and add a low and privileged enrollment. So, right property. This is what we want. I actually do find this. So there are a bunch of ways this can end up happening. A lot of time it's someone's troubleshooting something and it never gets reverted. But even if you don't have right property directly, if you have full control of the object, that's included. So sometimes you'll see that you have full control. This is the one I really want to talk about is right the third bullet here, right DACL. I'm not really sure why AD admins tend to spread this all over the place, but I find this everywhere and on everything. So what right DACL actually does is that permission set means that we're allowed to edit the ACLs of that object if we have right DACL permission to it. So in this case, if I can edit the ACLs, I can grant myself right property and then modify the cert. But if I don't have that, if I'm the owner can also grant right property to another principal. And every once and then if I don't have any of those, if I can find somewhere where I have right owner, then I can use that to make myself the owner and then give myself the right property. So these are a bunch of different ways that you can get to that same permission. But once you have it, we can actually start modifying that template. So we're gonna use certifies manage template function. We could also use PowerShell or MMC, but PowerShell is very instrumented and MMC requires a GUI, so I'll stick to certify. Plus, it's a lot easier. So here's how we first grant ourselves the permissions that we need. If we have right owner, we can use manage template, uh, dash dash owner, and then put the SID of a principal that we control. So whatever user we already have control over. Now that transfers ownership to that SID. If that's all we have to start there. If we have right DACL or we have owner perms already on that, then we can do the same command, except this time we're going to do dash dash right property and put the SID of a principal you control. This does not have to be different SIDs. You can do all of them when using the same user. You just want to make sure you're assigning it to something that you have control over. So now that we have the right permissions, we can actually go and edit the actual template. So again, this is the same thing we saw before. Want enrollee supply subject, client auth, and we want enrollment rights a group we control. Also, if manager approval is set, we can clear that if we want. So the way we do that is the manage template again. So I mean, didn't want to do screenshots for all of these. I just wanted to kind of cover this because you can reference it later. But to set the enrollee supplies, the enrollment rights, sorry, not enrollee supply subject. To set the enrollment rights, you do dash dash enroll and then use the security principal. I say a principal you control, but you can, which you absolutely can do. But if you really want to technically be doing ESC1, you need to apply that to authenticated users, domain users, or a global group like that. Because technically, if you set this to a specific user, you're doing ESC2. Not that it matters. Both of them end up with the domain getting owned. So do what you need. You set your EKUs. So I'm showing 3 examples of ones that I use commonly. We've only talked about client auth. So if you do manage template dash template name or dash template name and do dash dash client auth, this will add client auth to, or actually what it does is it toggles it. If it's already there, it will remove it. If it's not there, it will add it. So this technically gets us where we need to be. I'm only showed PK and init auth and smart card logon because these two types of EKUs can also be used for authentication. And these are what some of those other 8 escalation paths that were not in the original white paper were about. The reason I bring these up is there are some really high-end EDRs that are getting better at detecting us using a certificate that's abusing client auth, but they are not so great at detecting PK init or smart card. So if you try to use the cert and you get caught, if you have the ability to set the enrollment rights, I don't see these default set very often, but if you can set them, you can use a much sneakier way of authenticating. The actual tactical use is the exact same. It's just using a different mechanism. And then the last one that we needed to add was the enrollee supply subject. That's just dash dash supply subject. You don't need to put a SID or anything like that. Other than that, just tell it the template you're using and do supply subject. So now, oh yeah, I guess last quick one notes. If you do have manager approval on there, if that's what's blocking you, you can use manage template dash dash manager approval to turn that off. And if you do, remember you also need to run manage template dash dash authorize signatures and set it to 0. If that's the part that's blocking you is that manager hardening, you can just turn that off and now you can do it. You can finish your exploit. Um, So now that we have our certificate template using the ESC4, we're done with what's ESC4. We have now prepped the certificate template to be vulnerable to ESC1. We just do the same thing we did before. We request the certificate with certified requests, copy the base 64 blob, and then request a Kerberos ticket with our base 64 ticket. And finally, we profit. So I'm going to really briefly touch on some detection and telemetry. If you really want to know how to harden and detect some of this stuff, definitely check Cindy's talk next. She's doing the counterpoint to my talk because she has to do everything better than I do. So thanks, Cindy. No, kidding. So event IDs. The core ones that I like to use in detection is 4886 and 4887. It's important to note that these event IDs are not logged by default. So you will need to go into your domain GPO and set all certificate authorities to log these events. I actually recommend going and setting the whole, there's 11 events total. If you look at Windows Ultimate Security and just go start at 4886 and keep going up until you don't see any more that say certificate services, I would recommend turning all of those on, even if you're only collecting 48, 86, and 87 in your SIM, because this will give you good context for IR when you do have an event of interest pop. Um, I am not going to write the searches for you, but I'll tell you how to do them. If you want me to write them for you, you'll have to come hire me to do a purple team. Um, 4886 and 4887, as I mentioned, are the ones I like to use. I prefer 4887 because 4886 is a certificate request was made. 4887 says the request was approved and a certificate was generated. This is way more interesting to me. So what I'm going to do is look for these events where the subject and the subject alternative name fields or SAN fields are different. If they are different, there's probably something hokey going on. If you have in your sim, if you have the a lookup table like in Splunk or I can't remember what it would be in Kibana, if you have a way to cross-reference the SAN with a privileged user group membership, and you do that, that's a super high fidelity, a critical finding alert because if you see the SAN a SAN that's a privileged user and it doesn't have a matching subject line, you probably just had your domain owned. It's really simple logic. This isn't hard to implement, and it's pretty high fidelity. Mitigations. I'm going to say this like 3 times in the next 2 minutes. Um, Audit your certificate templates. It takes no time at all. 10 minutes. Compile, certify. Go get an exception to your EDR to be able to run it on your machine and or obviously have permission to do so, but and check and see what vulnerable cert templates you have. It's very quick, and then you can go start mitigating those. Other things to watch out for: make sure you're looking at your enrollment. If that enrollment is a large low privilege group, basically you can have enrollee supply subject if it's only high privilege groups that are allowed to enroll. But if you have to have a low privilege group, you need to have enrollee supply subject turned off. Um, And if you absolutely have a dead use case that you cannot do that, that is kind of the point where you have to put a manager approval on it and have a human approve it to make sure you're not getting owned. Um, so yeah, like I said, I was gonna say this a couple times. When you're done here, seriously, just go check for those authenticated global user groups for enrollment rights in your cert templates. Don't leave yourself wide open to getting insta-pwned by not even a high tier adversary. This is script kiddie stuff at this point. Also ensure your CA logs are being generated and sent to a SIM and start building detections around this. That white paper I talked about before, the certified pre-owned, has some example searches for all of the original 8. It's pretty easy to get searches written for all of these escalation paths. All right, I have 5 minutes left, and it's time for questions. So I'm going to start in the chat, and and then I'm going to get the ones that are in the QA real quickly because I only got 2 in the chat. The first one, Richard Harris asked me, would ESC7 apply to virtual smart cards are used by Citrix Fast? Yes. Um, so ESC7 does it. The real reason I say it only matters if you use smart cards is essentially you have to see certificates going across the wire. If you can see authentication requests with public key encrypted certificates, you can relay those. That's why ESC7 is kind of scary. Um, Andrew asked me on ESC1, do all the template parameters that we discussed have to be met? Yes, those 3 parameters and that one negative one, that manager approval, all of those have to be set correctly in order for it to happen. On a bright side, all of those are either defaults or they're very common use cases for certificates. I find usually about 8 or 10 templates on most ops that I do. I find 8 or 10 templates that are vulnerable to ESC1. So you'll have plenty to choose from. This is the last ones from my chat. Let me get to the QA. Has Microsoft done anything to patch/mitigate these? Roy, you're such a troll. I love you for it though. Yes, Microsoft has tried to patch it. Like I said earlier, they put something in, it broke tooling for about a day, and then the tooling was all updated and it works again. And as far as I'm aware, they have not put out any other patches that mitigate ESC1. There's been I want to say that ESC 15 has a patch for it. But I've never seen ESC 15 in the wild anyway. So, um, but yeah, these all still work. And just because he's a troll, I have to read the second half of his question. His full question was actually, does Microsoft done anything about it, or are they pulling a Kerberos and saying it's a feature, not a bug? The long and short answer of it is this is not necessarily an architectural problem like Kerberos. This is a people are deploying ADCS without understanding what they're doing and they're misconfiguring it. So we need to go check for those misconfigurations. And with that was the last of the questions I had. So just a couple of quick housekeeping things. One, make sure you stick around for Cindy's talk if you want to learn all about how to undo everything that I just talked about. Um, and I will be getting these slides available for download. We'll send out links for that after the conference. I do have a couple of slides here that have like further resources, links to the white paper I kept referencing, all of this stuff. So I will make sure that you guys have access to that. And with that, thank you everyone for attending, and I look forward to seeing everyone tonight at Hacker Jeopardy. If you want to have a good old like bar trivia night, virtual happy hour, come hang out with us again. Thanks,
Yes,
guys.
we're looking forward to that. Thank you, Chris.